Thank you. I'm really honored to be here and see so many people who are familiar with me. I thank you. We're talking about being here in a college town in a kind of conservative organization. I started in an organization called Young Americans for Freedom back in my college days. We were mostly a college organization, conservatives, and our most active chapters were in the most liberal campuses. And that's because on the conservative campuses, there wasn't anything to do. So, keep active and keep going. And I just found out they've reactivated Young Americans for Freedom a couple of years ago. And I just saw a report that YAF chapters are growing at a faster rate than any time in its history. So our young people are starting to get the message. Now, I know some of you have heard about Agenda 21 and what it is. This is a massive, massive issue. And I'm going to talk very fast. I apologize for that, but the clock is ticking. And I'm going to tell you as much as I can, but I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about where it came from and everything. I'm going to talk to you about what it's doing and how it's gotten to where it is and why it's a threat to you. Let me start out by saying this. Free enterprise, individualism, and private property. These three things encompass all of the principles of freedom. You take away any one of them, and freedom begins to diminish. Our founders built the very foundation of this nation on those three things: free enterprise, individualism, private property. These three truths of our life define you as a unique individual, free to engage in commerce and benefit from the fruits of your own personal labor, and they provide you with the direct path to building personal wealth and a life of your own. Free enterprise, individualism, private property. These are the reasons why the United States grew into the envy of the world, why millions sought to come here, and why we have quickly surpassed ancient nations, ancient cultures, in prosperity and the standard of living. But I'm here to tell you that there is a massive force that's out there working to eliminate these principles of freedom from our culture and our system of government. And I'm sure you can see it, but perhaps you aren't sure what it's really about, what's happening, why is it there? One result is that our own culture and our way of life is being changed. You see that, you know that. This is a scary thing we're seeing every day. Most notably, our government is changing, especially at the local level. It's changing from the way that most of you perceive it. It's changing in its makeup, and it's changing the way that it operates. Why? How? Who is behind it? As I said, I don't really have time to go into all the details of it, go into its roots and everything. But let me say this. The change is not local. Janie read a definition out of Wikipedia about on the local level, it's all local. The only thing all these things have in common is none of them are local. Quickly, I will tell you that there is a policy you've heard of called sustainable development. You go on the internet, you Google sustainable development, you go into any website of any corporation, you will see sustainable products, sustainable farming, sustainable the way this, sustainable that. Everything is sustainable. Isn't it all wonderful? You hear the term used, especially in the discussion about local development, farming practices, and energy use. We're told it's just a good conservation practice to protect the environment and have a good plan for future development. I'm here to tell you that that is not necessarily true. What is true is that sustainable development is the official outgrowth of an international plan called Agenda 21. Now, there are legions of officials, representatives of international and governmental organizations, and a slew of other people that will tell you Agenda 21 is a myth, and pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. For talking about Agenda 21, I, of course, have been called everything from a nutcase to a domestic terrorist. I thank the Southern Poverty Law Center for that. They've done 4 separate reports on me. But when it was first introduced to the world at the UN's Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, there were 50,000 delegates that proudly announced that Agenda 21 was a comprehensive blueprint for the reorganization of human society. That's what they said it was. A comprehensive blueprint for the reorganization of human society. Imagine that. And sustainable development policies were designed to achieve those goals. So how is it changing your government? Well, there are 3 main points of attack through the enforcement of sustainable policy. 1, destroy private property ownership and control. 2, impose regional councils and governments, taking government further from the people, non-elected regional councils and governments. And 3, feed it all through federal grants. Let's start by attending a local city council or county commission meeting or a planning committee meeting. Anybody been to any of these planning committees, things like this? Okay. Did you take a bath when you got home? First, you will hear a completely new language being used. You're going to hear them talking intently about wetlands, conservation easements, watersheds, viewsheds, rails to trails, biosphere reserves, greenways, carbon footprints, partnerships, preservation, stakeholders, land use, environmental protection, development, diversity, visioning, open space, heritage areas, and comprehensive planning, all part of that new language of government. What you will rarely hear are references to private property and free enterprise and individual choice. You will also notice a lot of faces that aren't really local people who seem to be wielding a lot of influence during the meetings. In fact, you may notice your elected representatives are giving them a lot of attention. I've actually been in meetings where it was pretty much one of them in the back of the room going, who are these guys? They are planners and representatives of private organizations or non-governmental organizations, NGOs. They call themselves stakeholders. I love this. They aren't even from the town, and they come in and go, we're the stakeholders. And you will sit in meetings and you will hear them talking about, well, we talked with the stakeholders, we met with the stakeholders. They don't even belong there. They're carpetbaggers. You are the stakeholders. You are the ones that have to live under what they do. But, those are people out there. You'll find representatives of these same organizations in nearly every single local government meeting in the nation. They are, in fact, national. Sometimes they're international organizations with the goal of reorganizing human society. Oops, I said it again. I'm not supposed to say that. Many of them helped write Agenda 21, and they helped write the federal grant programs. Then they used their influence to get your local representatives to apply for the grants. They come with specific strings attached, and that the community will be required now to carry out. Very quickly, let me tell you, this is how, what they said, what you said in your Wikipedia thing, it's just an innocuous 20-year-old document that's just a suggestion. It doesn't have any enforcement capability. This is what you will hear over and over again. I guarantee you, if you go to your city council meeting or your county commission meeting this week and you bring up Agenda 21, that's what you're going to hear. It just, it has no enforcement capability. My favorite line is, there are no blue-helmeted troops at City Hall. Here's how they did it. The same organizations that wrote it at the international level then came into the countries, particularly the United States. Bill Clinton became president right after that. He created by executive order the President's Council on Sustainable Development. Then he, who served on this council? The purpose of the council was to take Agenda 21 policy and turn it into American law. On that council were the same representatives of the NGOs that helped write it, the heads of or representatives of almost every agency in the federal government, and heads of corporations, all coming together. I find it interesting that Enron was one of them. So you can tell what geniuses they were. Pardon me. So then, after they got all this together, they wrote these grants with these strings attached, then they went into the state legislatures. They got the state legislatures to pass a piece of legislation that said communities had to do a comprehensive development plan. And now you've got city councilmen or county commissioners sitting there going, what the heck is a comprehensive development plan? The same NGOs roll in and they go, oh, don't worry, got it all right here in a box for you. We got the money for you too. You don't even have to think. Just press real hard. There's 45,000 copies. Just go right there. That's how it went from the international level to your neighborhood, and that's why it has the teeth of law. The policies of the grants lead to the creation of something called these stakeholder councils, as I said. Then they turn and run. They're run by the same NGO groups that helped write those grants in the first place, and eventually the community government, this is the biggie, the government now all of a sudden announces a new vision for future development. We are all so excited. They're going to get the newspaper editor. They're going to get the president of local college. They're going to get the superintendent of schools. They're going to get city council behind them. Everybody's standing there. We have a new vision. We're going to make this town over. Next, you'll start finding the establishment of things like water councils, energy councils, development councils, land councils, all designed to control the use of these vital tools. And none of them are elected. They just serve there. Who are they? The NGOs. The result, private property rights of the owners begin to disappear. As land use becomes tightly controlled, taxes go up to control energy use. Community development begins to mean the use of eminent domain to tear down neighborhoods and replace them with pack and stack high-rise housing. Most importantly, as the grants and the stakeholders begin to take hold of the community, watch how the function of legitimate elected government within the sustainable system fast becomes little more than a rubber stamp to create and enforce the dictates of the non-elected stakeholder councils. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the demise of our representative government, and that is one of the goals. Once the councils are established, it becomes much more difficult to discuss issues with your elected representatives. Instead, you will automatically be referred to the proper council or the administrator or the department run by unresponsive appointed hacks who have their own political agenda and they don't care what yours is. These councils begin to grow and expand in power. And eventually, regional councils are established made up of non-elected members that are supposed to represent whole areas, sometimes as many as 10, 15 counties, all working to impose the same policies to every community under one umbrella. Regionalism is designed to undermine and replace locally elected representatives. As I said, it takes government further from the people. There are programs today, specifically out of HUD, called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. Don't you love that? This is the most creative work they do in government, naming these programs. But this program automatically puts your county into a community, into a region. In many cases, sometimes the local governments don't even know they're in one until it's too late. And it's the regional governments that will apply for the grants and bring them in. Now they've got to obey specific rules. The regional councils are usually the ones to apply, as I said, for the grants. Their plans don't protect property rights, and the regional council impose one-size-fits-all regulations without regard for local wants and needs. And fighting them really becomes nearly futile. I get calls every single day from people saying, help me, help me, help me. What do we do? It's very difficult. The grants with the strings attached make sure of it. They answer to no one. They are not elected, and that makes them the perfect vehicle to enforce sustainable policy, which, remember, has been designed to what? Change human civilization. The grants dictate rules, regulations, and money to urban and rural communities across the country, enforcing code revision, transit-oriented development, so-called affordable housing, corridor planning, green building codes, and climate change policy. And they use the force of eminent domain to recreate your community into the image envisioned in these codes and the development plans. This is what local officials are telling you is a local plan. This is what the comprehensive blueprint is in action. This is what regional planning really is. And groups like the American Planning Association, which is in almost every community in the country, push the process. Voluntary guidelines. They always tell, oh, it's just voluntary, just voluntary. They love that word. Mandatory volunteerism, I think, is the oxymoron of our day. Voluntary guidelines announced to reduce energy use quickly become mandatory regulations as dictated through the grant programs. Today, across the nation and throughout the world, there are regional visioning programs being put into place. In almost every region of every state, there is now a similar plan, usually ending with numbers like 2030, 2040, 2050. And you know what? You can go on the internet and you can Google, find Jamaica 2050, Dubai 2050, and you will find they are identical to your local 2050. There's nothing local about it. They're all the exact same plans, no matter where they are in the world, and as the one I said, the one thing they have in common is none of them are local. That's by design, because most are being implemented by the same planners nationwide, fueled by the same grant programs, and aided by the same NGO groups. And smart growth is the term that you usually find in the community. Smart growth planners promote their schemes by insisting that Americans live the wrong way. And they use land use regulations to impose on others what they insist is the right way. Now, here's how it works. They put a line around the community. Now, I don't have time to do this tonight. I scare people when I come in with this. But what I like to do is bring people up and form a circle with this rope. This is the line around the city. And then I start having people come up. More and more and more, because what happens when the population starts to grow, when you put a line around a city and say no growth will take place outside of this line? That's smart growth. Stack and pack. I can go into great detail on it, but that's, gives you an image. It's kind of funny when you start having about 40 people stand in the middle of that rope. I got to thinking that probably I better be careful. I might hurt somebody. The guys in the middle get squished. This means that the focus for future housing will be for high-density neighborhoods living in high-rise housing. What they have done around the country, first thing that happens, once you put that around there, the first thing that happens is, well, they don't have room for single-family homes anymore. Now we got to get rid of those. Now we can have low-rise apartments. Oh no! Wait a minute. Population grew. We got to get higher. Pretty soon, they get higher and higher and higher. Then what do you do when they've gone as high as they can go? Now you got to make them smaller and smaller and smaller. So pretty soon, if they keep on with this, you're going to get this little apartment. Well, actually, you get a bed and a sink and a little bathroom. No, that's a prison cell. This is that's what you're going to get. It means the use of private cars will be discouraged in favor of public transportation, biking and walking. You see those bike paths out there. This isn't just to share the road with bicycles. They intend for the bicycles to take over the road, and we're going to get rid of the cars. And if you don't understand that, if you think, well, what's wrong with bicycles? I have had Greens attack me. I have a fear of bicycles. Bicycles are going to give us tyranny. No, it's a result of it. That's what they don't want to talk about. How do they get rid of the cars? Well, there's several ways. Higher taxes on cars and on gasoline. There are now plans to tax the miles you drive every year. Oregon has become the first country, they feel they're in another country, the first state to begin to implement this. Every car now has a little black box in there. And you go in for a state inspection or something, they can pull out that and see how many miles you drove, send you a tax bill. Most plans include a program called the Complete Street, and that's the edict that you share with the bicycles and so forth. In many cities, like San Francisco, and this is more than that now, they are now building residential apartment buildings without parking lots. The whole idea is to make it harder and harder to drive to where you say, I ain't going to do that anymore. In New York City, they've implemented what is called progressive street projects. They built more than 400 miles of new bike lanes, and they created a massive pedestrian plaza in Times Square by closing 5 blocks of Broadway to cars. Now just imagine how difficult it's always been to drive in New York City. Now they've closed off 5 blocks of one of the busiest streets in the city. New York City announced the purpose was to change the culture. Comprehensive blueprint for the reorganization of human society. Change the culture. The pedestrian plaza, they're placed in the center of what were once very busy streets, blocking off traffic and again making it difficult to drive in the city. But here, promise the planners, people can congregate and sit at tables in an outdoor atmosphere and enjoy each other rather than rushing around by themselves in cars. One of the leaders of this project said, quote, you ready for this? What we're trying to do is see equity of public space. When you build your streets for cars, you're actually building in the expectation that people are going to have cars. End quote. So if you stop having streets, obviously people will stop wanting cars. She went on to explain, it costs $10,000 per year for a household to own and maintain a car. We're talking about building an affordable option for people to get around. Ladies and gentlemen, that is social justice. Social justice is redistribution of wealth. That's what it's about. The end result of social justice is poverty. It's all designed to reduce your ability to drive so that you'll use your bikes on short trips and public transportation, including light rail trains that go where they want to go, not where you want to go. And it's more. Sustainable development is an all-out attack on private property. Private property is the way that, it's in their way. They sit there behind closed doors. And they make plans for your future. I was addressing a radio host in New York City. He was a host on CBS Radio New York. Doesn't get any more liberal than that. We were standing in a hotel ballroom area overlooking Manhattan, and I'm trying to pitch him on these ideas. And I said, look out that window. And he looks out and see Manhattan, all the buildings, everything there. And I said, you see people out there, you see buildings out there, people are paying taxes and people are paying mortgages on those buildings. But you know what? As far as your eyes can see, there is not a single private property right because every decision about those buildings is made by somebody else behind closed doors. He turned around and he grinned at me and said, we got to get you on. Now, if you think that's too harsh that I say that there's somebody else making these decisions, well, when there's a doubt about what I say, I always like to let the sustainable promoters do the talking for themselves. It's much more effective. Just a few months ago in New York, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio said this in an interview in New York Magazine. Quote, what's been hardest is the way our legal system is structured to favor private property. I think people all over the city of every background would like to have the city government be able to determine which building goes where, how high it will be, who gets to live in it, and what the rent will be. I rest my case. Now, let me go further. If you've been to these committee or these development meetings and so forth, Have you heard them talking about the real reason that they're doing this development is, well, if we don't, as we move into the future, we're going to have chaotic growth. Sound familiar? Have chaotic growth. Let me give you a quote here. Let me see if this sounds familiar. The chaotic growth of cities will be replaced by a dynamic system of urban settlement. The region is formed by the economic interdependence of its development from the industrial complex to the industrial region. The region has a single system of transportation, a centralized administration, and a united system of education and research. Sound about right? This was written in 1968 by an architect named Alexei Gutenov. Alexei Gutenov was a Soviet-Russian architect writing in a document called The Ideal Communist City. Sustainable development. I mean, could it be that sustainable development is the extension of the master plan for the ideal communist city? Oh, no. Our local officials would never do that. They assure us that everything they're doing, there's no international connections, all this, it's all just local. So why is it that when you go to your local representatives, city council meeting or whatever, and you try to talk to them about these kind of programs, they won't listen to you when you complain? Ladies and gentlemen, these non-elected regional councils should never have the power to commit local elected government to policies or regulations. That must be done by actual elected representatives that you put there, people you elected, because that's how this is the way government is spiraling out of control. These are not the actions of a free society. Americans are guaranteed the right through the Fourth Amendment to be in the Constitution to be secure in your homes. The problem is not traditional zoning and planning. We have to have some planning. There's no question about that. Traffic does grow, roads get clogged, things like that. We're not talking about that. We are talking about a top-down, one-size-fits-all control. And that's completely different than, you have no say at all. Our founding fathers were brilliant. They understood that the local government is the one that had the most, or should have had, the most impact on your lives. They made it so you could sit down and have a cup of coffee with them and talk to them about it and do something about it. And now we're finding with HUD, HUD found something very interesting just a couple of years ago with this Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. All these grant programs, it turned out that a lot of communities weren't completely complying. HUD hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to that until an NGO group up in New York filed a lawsuit against the community and won a several $1 million lawsuit. And HUD went there and looked at that and went, whoa, look at this. And they've started filing suits all over the country. What this means is your local elected representatives are being dictated to by HUD agents. Further, we see more and more governments armed with the federal grants, imposing arbitrary rules that try to enforce a one-size-fits-all straitjacket on everyone, regardless of individual situations. And more government power leads to more government corruption. Duh. Even if you believe that there needs to be changes in our society to protect the environment, surely any honest American would admit that such actions by government are out of line. Yet as Americans are being forced to live this way, all under the excuse of environmental protection, here's the kicker. The little-known fact that none of it is necessary. If your whole argument is that we're going to protect the environment. A few years ago, the American Planning Association did a study to see if all of their efforts to enforce smart growth worked. The APA's own study reported that smart growth does not work. Here's the final concluding paragraph of that APA-sponsored study. It said, quote, "The current planning policy strategies for land use and transportation have virtually no impact on the major long-term increases in resource and energy consumption. They generally tend to increase costs and reduce economic competitiveness. In many cases, the socioeconomic consequences of less housing choices, crowding and congestion, may outweigh the very modest CO2 reduction benefits. End quote. Sustainable development is an international scheme designed as national and local policy, created to rein in the radical ideas of individualism and personal property ownership, and to harmonize all nations into a central global control. And if we allow it to control our system of government, then it will result in a dark ages unlike anything ever experienced in human society. Isn't it significant to see that as private property comes under attack through sustainable development, that our country is also becoming less wealthy and less free? It's time that we demand a government that treats property owners like owners, not chattel to be pushed around as they like. So how do you fight back? I wanted to do this demonstration because I wanted you to see clearly what your government really is. We go through this charade of elections, and those people are hiding in the background. And we have got to get... Why did I say every one of them is a 501c3 private organization? Because people think the National Mayors Conference, the Governors Association, all that, are government organizations, and they have a legitimate right to be here. They don't. They are no more a legal government entity than My American Policy Center. We all file the same 990s to the IRS. You can get rid of them by getting rid of those county commissioners or city councilmen that bring them here. That's what you have to understand. You don't have to put up with this. You can get rid of them, but we have got to get out of our seats and do it. That's the main thing to know. You stand up for property rights, and we can stop sustainable development and put a cork back in government growth. But we need leaders that understand and will act on protecting property rights. And please understand, the fight starts on the local level, not in Washington, D.C. If you begin to build a movement in your local community, I guarantee you eventually some state legislators are going to take notice. And then some things are going to start to happen there. And when that starts happening in some states, it's going to happen at a federal level. It's got to start at the grassroots first. These forces that are pushing Agenda 21 are deeply entrenched in every city. They are highly organized and massively funded. And they have a very specific goal. They intend to see it fulfilled and will stop at nothing to achieve it. We have one choice. Fight. Fight for your homes. Fight for your community. It will take trench warfare in every city council meeting and in every county commission meeting. The number one goal, stop your elected officials from taking the grants. Number one. Number two, get a clear definition of property rights so you have a platform to stand on. I'm going to give it to you. This is it. This was written by a Supreme Court justice in the state of Washington named Richard B. Sanders. His court was beginning, back in the 90s, beginning to get more and more back in the 70s, beginning to get more and more cases of attacks on private property through sustainable development policies back in the 90s. They realized they didn't have a good definition of private property. We used to understand private property, that's mine, cross that line, suffer the consequences. Today, that's violence. You probably get put in the nut house for saying things like that. Well, here's what Richard B. Sanders came up with, and they are using it there, and I think it is perfect. Quote, property in a thing consists not merely in its ownership and possession, but in the unrestricted right of use, enjoyment, and disposal. Anything which destroys any of the elements of property to that extent destroys the property itself. The substantial value of property lies in its use. If the right of use be denied, the value of the property is annihilated and ownership is rendered a barren right. Now, I used that in Oklahoma. A legislator I gave it to him to use in some legislation. Trouble is, he only used the first sentence that said unrestricted right of use. The sustainabilists went nuts. They went to every city council, every mayor in the state and said, if this law gets passed, you won't have a job anymore. They're going to put big stinky old pig farms next door to people's homes. They really hate pigs. They always use that excuse. And, on and on and on. There is a vast difference between total control from the top, telling you every single thing to do with your property, versus having a beef with your property. Ever since we've had human settlements, we've had nuisance laws where if you had a problem with your neighbor, he's got a smelly old pig farm, he's got a bright light shining in your bedroom window all night, he's got loud music playing, he's got cars stacked up, whatever. First of all, we used to go over and talk to him. Fred, for crying out loud, can you put something on that? If that didn't work, you had nuisance laws to go to court. But no more. Now we have sustainable development. Everybody's living the same. Sustainable development means we are all equally controlled and equally poor. Private property ownership and its unrestricted use is the foundation for a nationwide revolution of freedom. Demand it. We are beginning to make some progress in this fight. Baby steps for sure, but we're learning new tactics and legislative plans to knock out sustainable policies. A revolution is beginning to stir as people are waking up to these threats to our way of life. I am getting more calls now than I've ever gotten before from county commissioners, city councilmen, state legislators. What do we do? What do we do? We're putting together a property rights network. And this is going to be an association of, it's not an association, it is a networking. It's bringing people together who are activists, organizations, elected officials. I'm very happy that the weakest thing we've had is a legal stand. We don't have a lawyer to turn to and do something. I'm starting to find lawyers who are in property rights, and I'm starting to bring them together. And many, many other things we're going to do with this. And we've got lots of radio shows and other things like that. Bring them all together to one fist so that we have the ability. We've got so many great activists who fight by themselves. Bring them together. Let these legislators network with each other. Put legislation. What would you think of this? Everywhere we try to do things, we're in a minority. Let's say in your state you have 3 good legislators. That's it. What can they do? Well, what if they're able to network with 3 legislators like them in 10 other states? What if, as they're networking, they can put together solid legislation, protection of property rights, whatever. And then, on exactly the same day, at exactly the same time, in all 10 states, all of these 3 legislators in each state hold a news conference to announce this legislation and drop it into the hopper, and we have activists ready to support them when they do it. What if we got it passed in 3 states? Would this start a revolution? That's what I'm trying to put together with the Property Rights Network. It's funny. We targeted ICLEI. I didn't mention ICLEI up here, International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives. And we targeted them. They were in 650 American cities, these cities paying them dues, bringing in computer programs, bringing in training, all to think about implementing sustainable development. We targeted them. Within 1 year's time, we got over 150 cities in America to drop their membership in ICLEI. And a friend of mine went to one of the international meetings, and the head of ICLEI USA was there. And he just walked up to him and said, "What do you think about all these groups that are attacking you?" And he said, "Oh my goodness, we can't stop them. We're terrified of them. We can't get anybody else to join us." He immediately emailed me, "Victory." This is what we have to do. Let me just finish with this. When our founders put the Republic together, they weren't only thinking of themselves. They were thinking of you 200 years later. They were thinking of a society in which everyone, from the farms to the inner city, were free to live their own lives off the fruits of their own labor, a life of your own. And they created a system in which government's only job was to protect and secure those natural rights you and I were born with. They knew the pitfalls, the dangers of men who worship power and control over freedom of choice. Today, you and I face the same challenge. The authors of these vision plans focus on their view of your future. You need to do that too. What kind of future will this plan leave for your children? Think of your grandchildren. Think of your great-grandchildren. And think of their great-grandchildren. What kind of nation will we leave them? The choices that we make today, the battles that we choose to fight here and now will determine if they even understand that there are concepts of free enterprise, individualism, and private property. The battle starts in your home, in your neighborhood, in your community. This plan can and it must be stopped. You see, I believe with everything in me, with all I've done my whole life, I believe if we can preserve your private property rights, your individual expression and free enterprise in your own community at the local level, then we can preserve freedom as a nation. Thank you.
We're going to have Q&A with the lovely Virgin Icons Vanna White over here in the red top. Andrea is going to have the microphone for the Q&A. There are the lights. Now you can see Susan Myrick back there. I forgot to mention the Conservative Leadership Conference, second weekend in April. Talk to her about signing up if you haven't. All of us at Icon Go, we have a vendor table. We want to see all of you there. It is the best thing. It is the best weekend to network with conservatives. All right, we got a line going. Test the microphone, Andrea.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? No. Can
Yeah,
you hear me
yeah,
now?
yeah.
That's the rule, right? That's what PJ does.
Yeah, she'll hold the microphone.
It's going to hold me. First of all, I want to applaud your efforts in trying to uphold our constitutional system. I understand that the troops in this Agenda 21 cause are ideologically motivated. But usually behind the scenes there are the cynics, the puppeteers, who derive some financial or political gains from what they have whipped up people to do. I'm having trouble seeing who that might be here. I'm wondering if this is one of those instances where follow the money doesn't explain things. Is this truly just an ideological, progressive, save the world, create world government type effort, or is there something else?
Well, as in every movement like this, you've got the ground troops that believe that, yes, that we're just doing it for that purpose. But there are those at the top. The number one goal of implementing Agenda 21 is global governance. That's why we're being invaded by illegals crossing our border, our national sovereignty, all that kind of stuff. They're working to eliminate it, little piece, little piece, little piece, as we go along. And that's ultimately the goal. And so those who, Mikhail Gorbachev said that ultimately the United Nations needs to be a world government. And that is what, and it's at their really elite meetings that they have, that's the way they talk. And so that's where they want to go with this. That's what it's about. So they're the ones, they see themselves as, the power mongers. I always ask the question, after they've destroyed the economies of every nation on earth to look like Venezuela and the Soviet Union, what are they counting on for their next meal? But apparently that doesn't come up in the discussions. But that's what's behind it. They get these useful idiots to go out and think this is all about protecting the environment, and we just need to do that. I have Greens say to me all the time, well, it doesn't matter how many freedoms or how many liberties you think you have, if you don't, or how many rights you have, if you don't have a planet to stand on, what good are they going to do you? And so that's the attitude.
But wouldn't the useful idiots also support world government?
Well, they do, because they've been...
They could be
Yeah.
open in terms of the
Sure.
ultimate
Yeah.
objective.
And we have, and the education system today is designed not on academics, but on behavior modification to create the perfect global village idiots. And that's what we have pouring out of our schools, so that they are pliable to do this. There's an organization in the United Nations. One quiet Sunday afternoon, I get this email from this guy attacking an article that I did on global warming. He called me a Nazi a couple times. And he was attacking me. I began to look in. It's called the Eden Foundation, like the Garden of Eden. And I started checking them out. They advocate what they call globally acceptable truth. They say that the reason we have wars and strife and poverty is because there's too much knowledge. So if we control what people think and what they know, we can make their life easier for them. The scary part is the website had a whole area of letters from world leaders saying, "Great idea!" That's the scary part. So, yeah.
Tom, I've heard a number of your wonderful talks. We know each other. And there's one aspect that you didn't mention, and I understand why. But I must bring it up because North Carolina is still in play with a convention of states, which is supposedly an Article 5 convention but has no authority. I've heard you tie this in some other talks to Agenda 21. Could you please just briefly tell the people here what you think about that? Because many states this year have rejected Convention of States. They're catching on, and we still have it to deal with in North Carolina in May because legislators have voted it down, and then a few went into caucus and decided to reconsider it in May. So this is an important issue, and it does tie in with what you said about our founding fathers' brilliance and the way they foresaw that their Constitution would stand fast. Till today, we don't need changes, but I'd like to hear what you have to say.
First of all, this is Win Coleman, right here in North Carolina. And we've worked together for a long time. Her father was one of the original members of the advisory board for My American Policy Center, General Gatsis. And we have a newsletter. She did an article for my newsletter on benefit corporations. She is the walk and talk and expert on benefit corporations. Benefit corporations, public-private partnerships, all of this, these corporations that are moving to help implement Agenda 21. This is the way at benefit corporations. They get to go to the head of the class and get all the goodies and help put their competition out of business. And we have these newsletters, over on my table over there. So,
we did it once and we defeated it this second time it was last General Assembly in the last hour of that time.
Yeah.
That's all.
On the Convention of States, we fought a constitutional convention for a long time. Even Judge Scalia and others said, this was a dangerous thing to do. We live in an era when 75% of the American people were against illegal immigration. We did it anyway. 75% of the American people were against Obamacare. We did it anyway. We're in a situation where we can't control what's happening. And along come these so-called conservatives who said, the Founding Fathers built an escape hatch in the Constitution in Article 5. We don't have to have, there's not just two ways to amend the Constitution, one being through Congress and another through a constitutional convention, which is dangerous. We agree with that. We're going to have a convention of states, and we can control that. Somehow these guys think there are no liberals ever going to show up at this convention. I don't know what universe they're living in. Everywhere I go, there are liberals taking over things. So where they think that they can come up and they can control a balanced budget amendment, they can control all these other things, that and that's all we're going to talk about. There's no way. Article 5 just says when enough states call for a convention, Congress's job is to do it. And from that point forward, there are no other instructions. How are delegates chosen? What will be discussed? What we learned from the first Constitutional Convention in 1780 or 1778, 9, whatever it was. Anyway, what we learned there, about 10 states, the majority of the states, gave their delegates specific orders. that you will not talk about anything but we have this Interstate Commerce Commission problem. That's all you're to talk about. They walk into Independence Hall, shut the doors, shut the windows, created a new Constitution. And the interesting thing was, the precedent with that was the Articles of Confederation were what we were organized under, and it said you had to have 100% of the states agree to any changes to the Article. Putting in a new Constitution is pretty much a change to the Articles of Confederation. Interestingly enough, they used the provisions in the new Constitution for ratification, 2/3, 3/4, all that, to ratify the new Constitution. It wasn't the law of the land yet. That's a precedent, and that can be used against us. And they can go in there and create an entirely new Constitution, and and they always say, "Oh, we'll be safe because the states have to ratify." No, they don't. Not if they change the rules and then use that precedent. So that's a bogus thing, and it's an absolute lie.
I know we love that. That is an explanation. But in order to get all of our people
I know,
at
sorry.
the Q&A and to have book signing
Yeah.
and everything we want to do,
Yeah.
so we'll have short questions and...
Sorry about that.
No, I mean, we love it, but we're going to have to get through it.
Yeah,
So
okay.
Ben's got one more quick comment, and then we need to move on.
If anyone's interested,
Mike.
I'm sorry. If anyone's interested, I have flyers I made up last night that covered that issue that Tom just spoke about, and you can see it.
I've got a video over here, too, that ties Agenda 21 into the Article 5 Convention. They've got to get rid of the Constitution in order to put sustainable development in place. I've got a video over here on it.
I have a very short question, and also but I need a little short preface. A few years ago, I bought a new home in Chapelville in a neighborhood that I chose that I loved. And now the Planning Commission, I happen to be in Chapelville City, but Durham County, and they're wanting to put a light rail maintenance facility across the street from me that will be open 24/7, 365 days a year. And so my question for you is there any chance that Nikki Haley and President President Trump's influence will give us any relief from the Agenda 21 issues?
I have been, we thought the best chance we had to do something like that was with Ben Carson at HUD to get rid of the affirmatively furthering fair housing. They've danced around it. They've put a little more lipstick on it, make it look a little nicer, but it's still there. It's still terrorizing us. And I had a meeting set up with Ben Carson in August, and all of a sudden it was canceled. And I understand his chief of staff is a woman who's a holdover from the Obama administration who will never let me get near him. So I no, that's not the way to go. You're going to have to do it at the local level, or maybe a state legislative thing, something like that.
Hi, Tom.
Hi.
I would like to know, how big a part does the Communist Party and George Soros have in Agenda 21?
They've never had better days. Both. George Soros funds so many of these organizations. People say, where's the money come from? And a major part of it is that you can just watch him operate. And, of course, he said the other day, well, Donald Trump will be gone before 2020. So, yeah. The Communist Party USA, they just beside themselves. They're sitting there, they go to their meetings, and they're going, they bought that too? So, yeah, this is...
They funded taking down the statue of Durham.
Sure they did, yeah.
I have a question about page 81 and 82 in your sustainable book. You refer to a man named John Posgad.
Yeah.
Is there an effort underway to get him a presidential pardon and pay the plus interest for his $200,000 fine?
Well, it'd be nice if they did. If we could get control and begin to roll this back, then some of those things would happen. There have been people who've gone to jail. He was one of them. Mr. Posgay in Pennsylvania he bought some property. He was going to build a facility. He did truck repair, things like that. And this facility, the drainage ditches for years had been filled with tires, and those tires had stopped the drainage and made the land flooded. Well, he went in and cleaned them up. It was junk. he was immediately arrested for damaging a wetlands. And he was put in jail, $200,000 fine, put in jail. He came from a former communist country to come here to live in freedom. And that's what happened to him. Sustainable development. So, yeah.
Excellent presentation, Tom.
Thank you.
I like your strategy a lot. Quick question, financial question. How likely are we be able to weather the storm of the pocketbooks of George Soros and Thomas Steyer? How much financial reality do we have?
I think that we've got to take some great encouragement from what has happened with Donald Trump. Whether you agree with everything he's done or anything like that, he energized people like they had never been before and is doing a lot of things. I mean, if all of his cabinet were like the head of the EPA right now, we'd have a revolution on our hands. We'd really be rolling. Maybe, after what he did today, he's going to start getting rid of a bunch of them and fix it. But we've got a long way to go. But we have people who have been energized and got active that were never before. And you see these huge meetings he still has. That energy is still there. And that's what we need. Money-wise, my little operation has been causing him all kinds of trouble for years, and I got nothing. I don't get any federal grants. I wouldn't take federal grants. I don't get any corporate grants, anything like that. It's all donations from folks like you. And we can make a dollar go a whole lot farther than they can. And I believe so. Yes, I do. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for coming and kicking off our season. Come over here and see mine for the books.
Can I just?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is my brand new book, Sustainable, The War on Free Enterprise, Private Property, and Individuals. It covers everything I talked about tonight and a whole lot more. It goes into great detail on a lot of these things, including one chapter entitled The Walk of Shame. If you're interested in novels, last year I somehow wrote fiction. I never did before. My novel, Erase, political thriller. I am shocked that it has gotten several reviews completely independent of each other that compare it to 1984, Atlas Shrugged, and Michael Crichton's State of Fear. I'm actually talking to some people about the possibility of making a movie out of it. And then my first book, Now Tell Me I Was Wrong. This is a collection of articles I wrote on the environment, on education, on Agenda 21, on personal privacy, property rights, all that. And when I wrote these articles, people said, oh, come on, that's crazy. Then I started seeing editorials that looked like I wrote them, and that's why I titled it, Now Tell Me I Was Wrong. So those are here tonight. Please get one, and I'll be happy to sign them, and I appreciate it deeply. Thank you.